Dan and I have been talking about real estate as per usual, but it's interesting the market we're going into. It's hard to tell what's going to happen. The Fed says, "Oh, we're going to raise interest rates," but then they don't. In fact, they don't. They don't even make an attempt to. So it's kind of interesting. If interest rates do push up a little bit, I've talked to a lot of students lately who felt, and I know Dan talks to him a lot too, about, well, how will that affect the market? And there's a good possibility that we could actually enter into a little bit of a recession. And if that's the case, or if interest rates hit 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% again, like we had back in the early 80s and late 70s and the early 80s, can you still make a living in real estate? Well, and the answer all this, of course, is yeah. Whether it's a buyer's market or seller's market, it's still a realtor's market. We just take our, percentage, off the top. And you might have to change who you're working for a little bit. Right now, a lot of you have discovered that if you have friends in the business, they've discovered that working with buyers is kind of tough right now. I made an offer on for a buyer I was working with over the weekend on a property, and I didn't even like the house that much, but they're kind of desperate, and they said, "Well, okay, it's not what we want, but maybe it's what we can get." And yeah, there was only 14 offers on it.
Only.
So we didn't get that one, even though they offered like 20 grand over the list price. Someone offered even substantially more and dropped the appraisal provision, the appraisal contingency. So, you can always make a living. You're just going to have to become more schooled in how to make that living. And I have always preached for many years, Blake, that the real beauty of being in real estate is to control the inventory, to be a listing agent, because if you're a listing agent, you could be a nasty, mean SOB and no one likes you and you're hard to get along with, but people still will bring you their 14 offers because there's nothing else out there. And you can not get back to people, you could be obnoxious, but if you control the inventory, everyone still has to deal with you, and I was talking with an agent, gosh, just last month, and they were so frustrated because they've had a buyer that they're out working with, and in order for a buyer to get a house, they pretty much have to make a half dozen offers these days or thereabouts, and that's just the way it is. Well, but that means, well, let's take a look at this, what happened this weekend. Okay, there were 14 offers that came in, but there was one agent representing a buyer that won, but there's always, on the other side of the deal, the agent that always wins, and that's the listing agent. And so which would you rather be? Would you rather have 5 buyers you're working with or 5 listings? Obviously 5 listings is better than 5 buyers, especially when you have to do 6 offers to get per buyer. That's writing 30 offers in order to get 5 deals. Or if you have 5 listings, you're probably going to do 5 deals and they're probably going to come fairly quick. This property had only been on the market for 2 or 3 or 4 days. So you decide which side you want to work with, but in this type of a market that is so slanted in the seller's favor, it's really smart to work listings. And the best place to get listings is from your own sphere of influence, people that know and trust you, your family, your friends, the clubs you belong to, church groups you belong to, community things that you're involved with, nonprofits, whatever. You need to start putting together a database, Blake, of all these people And then you need to contact them on a regular basis and let them know that, remind them that you're in real estate, and the basic rule of database marketing is that they have to hear from you every month with something in the mail, and email is okay. Or you can use snail mail, but every month they get something from you in the mail involving real estate, and then every quarter, every 90 days, they get a phone call. And you can put that in a customer relationship management software, and there's many of them. Some are much more sophisticated than others, and but some are even free. You can even use Outlook, and if you wanted to, but it's real important. I stress this to agents as long as I've been teaching and working with agents. I started in the business in 78, but I started teaching in 1980. And, you really need to do something for the sphere of influence. And I've worked with a lot of agents that have stalled out or they burn out, and they'll call and they'll say, I can't seem to get going this year. Can we get together? Can we talk? I says, absolutely, and give them a little encouragement and whatnot. But I always ask them, and some of these people are 2-3 years in the business, and I ask them, how many people are in your database? Well, I haven't put one together yet, Well, if you don't have a database, then you will be repeating all of your prospecting efforts again and again and again. But if you have a database and you're working your database and you're doing it smart, and there's a lot of ways to work a database. I mean, the people in your database, you want to know what kind of house they're living in, and you want to know what kind of house someday they want to live in. So every time you get a buyer, you query your own database for someone that has a house similar to what your buyer's looking for. Dear Bob and Martha, you may not want to sell your house right now, but I'm working with a super duper buyer, and he's looking for a home a lot like the one you're in. If there's any possibility you might want to sell, particularly at these dramatically high prices, please let me know, And then if you get a house for sale, you query your own database to see what kind of home they want to buy someday. Dear Bill and Martha, you may not be interested in buying a home right now, but I just listed one that's a lot like one you said you want to have someday. I enclosed a flyer, and I'm going to hold it open, and this weekend, why don't you drop by and take a look? You don't have to be serious about it. I just like to see you again. It'd be nice to get caught up. So here they are, for 4 years now, or 3, or whatever it is. They've received something from you in the mail every month. They had a call from you every quarter. They had 3 letters saying you had a buyer for their home, and they had 4 letters saying you had a home that they might want to buy. Who do you think they're going to list with? Because most people, after even a year and a half, and sometimes even quicker, can't even remember the name of the agent that sold them their house. And that is so pitiful. But yet they have to go out and redo all this work again and again and again, whereas you could build a good book of business. And the ideal number, by the way, is 800 people in your database. And you can build that up by, people you work with, people you know. If you have a kid that gets married, get the wedding list on both sides. And people that came to your open houses, all kinds of people can be on your database. And you can also build it through the internet as well. Well, we have some fantastic questions tonight. We're going to be working with appraisal, and we're going to be working a little bit with tax questions. So Blake, feel free to just chime in and ask.
All right. Thank you. I can put myself on video for a second, but I'm in my police car just catching a break to listen to you.
Okay.
And so I'm just going to leave it on mute most of the time and leave my video off, just
not a problem.
But I'm here listening and learning. And I was going to ask you regarding the stuff that you just went over.
Right.
I'm assuming that you have a book or a
yes,
resource. Is it the
Hot Prospects by Bill Good?
What's it called?
Hot Prospects by Bill Good. I have one laying around here a minute ago. I was reading it. I must have taken it upstairs. But there's an author named Bill, B-I-L-L, Good, G-O-O-D, and there's a book called Hot Prospects. It's kind of an orange cover. Bill is the quintessential authority on how to do databases. Of course, he made himself buku buckets of money working with stockbrokers, but the same principles apply, and that's where you get it. But even your fellow officers, if you start part-time or if you start full-time, I mean, there's you have your whole blue brotherhood there that you should have in your database. Who else would they rather use?
Yeah, no kidding. There's multiple officers that are realtors right now, so I got some competition. But I was looking on my phone, and every time somebody gives me their phone number, I create a contact in my phone. So I got like 700.
There you go.
700 plus numbers in my phone already to.
Well, when you get to that point, when you get ready to do all that, I'd love to sit down with you and show you what we've got. I've also got a short little.
Yeah, that'd be great. I was actually going to reach out to you. And
I actually had Bill Good. I hired him to come and do a real estate seminar for the company I was working with, and we did it in the old Hale Center building. Not the big one, but the older one. And well, I don't know. We had about 300 agents there, but. Bill gave me the right to that seminar that he did, and I could sit down and go through that with you as well. Be happy to do that for you. It'd be an honor, and thank you for your service.
That would be great.
Thank you for your service, and I have a lot of relatives that have worn that badge. But anyway, all right, let's get into our questions for tonight. Let's go, Mr. Naylor. Number one, we're going to be talking a little bit about appraisal and a little bit about property tax. So our first question is, 4 principal determinants of value underlying the price for a product are: A, durability, quality, scarcity, and materials; B, desire, utility, scarcity, and purchasing power; C, popularity, utility, quality, and discount; and D, desire, cost, convenience, and time. Now, if we've always taught that you remember the 4 elements of value with the acronym DUST, D-U-S-T, and that's desire, utility, scarcity, and transferability. Your ability to sell it. So the correct answer to this is actually B. But instead of saying transferability, they use the term purchasing power, which is kind of a derivative of transferability, but that's the correct answer here. But that's really the only one that matches up as well as it should to DUST, D-U-S-T, demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. If any of these elements are opposite, or I should say absent, then you don't have any value. It's like utility. I mean, you could have a wonderful property, it could be 5 acres, and it can have a beautiful view, but it's on the side of a hill. So unless you want to, drill in and make a cave house or something, it really doesn't have a lot of utility. And utility sometimes also equates back to utilities. I mean, you can even get to the property. Or is there power to it as well? And of course, scarcity is something that has greater, if there's just a lot of it, then that affects the value as well. And of course, desire. Okay, so the correct answer there is B. Number 2, a construction boom in a market is an indication that prices, well, okay, A, have been increasing; B, have been declining; C, have been in equilibrium; D, have exceeded supply. Okay, well, obviously in this one, if prices have been declining, it's not going to be real exciting for builders to start doing spec homes. That's B, so that's not it. C, have been in equilibrium. That's also kind of a dangerous time to be, putting several $1 million out there in loans and your own cash. If things aren't moving very much up and down, or up anyway in price, and have exceeded supply, well, if you've got more homes than you need, right now we don't have enough. So, that we have the opposite effect. So the correct answer, number 2, is have been increasing. When you have a construction boom in a market, it's an indication of prices have been increasing. And everybody and their dog that ever had a contractor's license hops back into business and starts building. And, it's always an imperfect market. We're always overbuilt or underbuilt. It's just the way it is. And right now we're underbuilt. Builders are selling everything they can pound together, and at prices that are absolutely stupid. Of course, the checks are really big too. So, I guess that's the way it goes. Number 3, the subject property. And when we're talking about subject property, we're talking about an appraisal. So we have a subject property, and then we go out and find comparables. But a subject property has a smaller lot than comparable number 1. The adjustment should be, first of all, you never adjust the subject. We don't know what the subject's worth. We went out in the market and found homes that are similar to our subject in location and style and size and quality and age. And these are properties that have actually sold and closed. Okay, so we know what they sold for. So it'd be difficult to adjust the subject because we don't even know what it's worth yet. That's why we're doing the appraisal. You always adjust the comparables. And if a comparable is inferior, like this one, no, actually it's superior. The subject property has a smaller lot than comparable 1. That means the comparable was superior. So to make it look more like the subject, we'd have to lower that price. We'd have to adjust that down a little bit because the subject property had, because the comparable had a much better lot. Maybe it was a half an acre or something, and your subject property only had, 0.21 or, 0.19 tenths of an acre or something. So you'd have to do a subtraction to comparable number 1, and that would be B. And that's a very, very, you will see this. This is a concept they always test on. You never adjust the subject. You always adjust the comparables. If the comparable is superior, like this one, you got to take a little away, because normal buyers, they'd pay more for a bigger lot, probably. So we have to adjust that back so it's more like the subject property. And there could be situations where the subject property was superior. It had 2 fireplaces and your comparable only had 1. Well, then we've got to add a fireplace, at least the value of a fireplace, to that comparable to make it look more like the subject property. So if this sounds scientific, it's really not. It's kind of artsy. It's more artsy than scientific. Okay, let's look at number 4, please. To complete the sales comparison approach, the appraiser, A, averages the adjustments, the adjustments to the comparables. B, weights the comparables. Okay. C, discards all comparables having a lower value. Okay, well, whatever. D, identifies the subject value as that is the nearest comparable. And nearest meaning what? I mean, location or style or age. I don't know. The correct answer to this one is B, and it says he weights the comparables. But another word you see used there quite often on the exam is he reconciles. He doesn't average. You don't average the adjustments, or you don't average the values you came up with after adjustments. He reconciles. And so he may look at 3 or 4 comparables and say, well, this comparable number 1, man, this one was almost dead on exactly like the subject property. I might give a little bit more weight to that one than I do some of these other comparables, which are a little further away and maybe not as new, or maybe not as old, or whatever it was, or weren't as close to the subject as this one comparable is. And so, that's kind of artsy, and it is. So correct answer, of course, is B. He weights all the comparables. And another word for that is reconciles. Okay, number 5. Excuse me. The warehouse building lacks sufficient ceiling heights for the operation of modern forklifts. And this is an example of a non-conforming use. Well, non-conforming use refers to zoning or police powers. You know, you're using the property for something it's not zoned for. You know, that would be a non-conforming use. That's not it. B, functional obsolescence. That's the correct answer. Functional obsolescence is something in the property itself that would hurt the value because it's not as useful. You know, so here we have a warehouse building, and you know, most people that are running warehouses today want high cube space. They have forklifts that go way up there in order to make more efficient use of the floor space and you know the amount of rent they're paying for that floor space. So if you can't use that type of efficiency in equipment, then it has functional obsolescence. Another house that might have, you know, if you're talking about a house, not a warehouse, but a house that had 5 bedrooms and only 1 bathroom might have functional obsolescence as well. So it's not over improvement, it's under improvement, and it's not economic obsolescence. Economic obsolescence is something that takes place outside of the property itself. It's the major employer for an area pulling the plug and you know, closing down, and now unemployment for the area is skyrocketed, and so that's going to have an effect on real estate values. But it had nothing to do with the real estate itself. It was something outside the real estate, and it's called economic obsolescence. Functional is something inside the property, and sometimes we call it poor floor plan. But this one, you know, when we're talking about a commercial building that was designed as a warehouse, but you know, it was built, you know, circa 1962 or something, when he didn't have the high lift forklifts and stuff, you know, it's going to hurt the value. Okay. Number 6, one weakness of the cost approach for appraising market value is that A, builders may not pay market value for materials or labors. Well, okay. I mean, I guess they could have leftover materials they've been storing up, or they might got, you know, some real value on labor, but that really doesn't apply here. B, the market value is not always the same as what the property cost. Now, if you think about that, it rarely is the same as what it costs. I mean, if you build something and you have your cost and the market value is lower than the cost, you're not going to be building very long. Yeah, you lost money. Obviously, the goal would be to build something and would be worth more than the cost. And there are a lot of things that go into that. I mean, people's preference for an area, you know, the quality of the construction that you did, you know, the floor plan, you know, and many other factors. But that's one weakness of the cost approach. There are 3 approaches to value. There's the market value, there's the cost approach, and then there's the income approach. And the market data approach lends itself best to residential properties. And oh, Abigail, you know, thanks for joining us. And that's because comparables are easy to find. It's easy, you know, you're substituting the utility, and if it's a 3-bedroom house with 2 bathrooms, 2-car garage in an area, it's easier to find comps for that. But the cost approach is used primarily, looked at primarily for service type properties. I mean, a church building, you know, I mean, it's hard to find a comparable for a church building, or maybe a school building, you know, or something that was built for a purpose that you can't find comparables. And so how do we know what it's worth? Well, what would it cost to rebuild that? And then the income approach, of course, is used for income properties. But every appraisal has all 3 approaches to value. Every appraisal will have the market data, it will have the cost, and it will have the income approach. Now, if you're looking at a form appraisal, which most appraisers have a form for the type of property they're appraising. If you're looking at a residential property form, the income approach is 1 line on the 3rd or 4th page because most single family homes that you're appraising are not used as rentals, and therefore it doesn't have that much influence on what that one might be worth. the market data approach is the one that he would reconcile, or he would, weigh heavier. And he will look at the cost approach. That'll take up a half a page or so. But the market data approach on that form could be 2 or 3 pages, because that one would lend itself more to that. And if you had a form for a commercial property, it would have a much more inflated area page-wise for the income approach, because that's something that we all have to look at. It would also look for comps. Don't get me wrong, every appraisal has all 3 approaches, but by and large, a lot of times, if you're looking at a residential appraisal, the appraiser will often say in his remarks, I really didn't give much credence to the income approach in this appraisal. I weighed most heavily on the market data and the cost approach. And that's very, very common. Okay, we're on number 7, aren't we? Let's take a look at that one. Okay, in appraisal, the loss of value in a property from any cause is referred to as deterioration, obsolescence, depreciation, deflation. Okay. Well, the answer to this one, folks, is depreciation, and it's obsolescence. Is like we had before. We had functional obsolescence and we had economic obsolescence. But wear and tear is the other third part of depreciation. Now, when you say depreciation, it depends on the context that you're using that word. Because if this was a tax question, an income tax question, depreciation might have a whole different definition than it does if it's an appraisal question. And sometimes words are used differently. And of course, this is one of them. Depreciation means physical wear and tear, functional obsolescence, which is poor floor plan, like we mentioned before, or economic obsolescence, the main employer for the whole community pulling the plug, and there's no employment. It's like the company town that closed down, because but that's 3 different kinds of depreciation. Okay. And that's also called a loss in value, of course. Let's look at number 8. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some taxes now, and a little bit, not a whole lot about income tax. This is an income tax type question, but mostly about property tax. But this first one, a significant tax advantage to owning a primary residence. The tax advantage of owning a primary residence is, A, you can deduct the mortgage interest paid. That's a good one. Hang on to that one. B, you can deduct money spent on repairs, not on your personal residence. C, you can depreciate the property. You can't depreciate your personal residence. And D, the investment tax credits are available. Investment tax credits run a whole gamut of different things, including buying an electric car to all kinds of different things. And but that's not a significant tax advantage to a primary residence. Correct answer to this one is you can deduct your mortgage interest paid. Which when you're paying rent, you can't deduct that. But if you're paying the same amount in a mortgage, you can deduct that from your ordinary income, and it makes a tremendous difference. And the significant advantage, they keep talking about taking some of those advantages away, but it's hard to fight the realtor lobby. we have a very effective and significant federal and state lobby, for that matter. And we tend to protect the things that protect small business and also real estate ownership. Number 9, the object of going through the hassle of a 1031 exchange. Why would you do a 1031 exchange? Well, A, to delay the realization or the realizing taxable gain. That's the right answer, by the way. B, transferring equity into a new property. Well, you do transfer equity into a new property. But you do that by selling your old one and then paying cash for the new one, if you want to do that. But the problem is that you're going to pay tax on the sale. If it's a 1031 tax deferred exchange, you do a basis recapitulation. You actually move some of that basis of the old property into the new property, but it's not a taxable event. It's a trading one property for another. And so so you delay realizing the taxable gain and of course the subsequent capital gains tax that would be attached to that. It's not eliminating income taxes on the sale. Eventually, actually, though, it is in some ways, because if you bought a property, you traded for another, 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 and then you died. It's the only way that you could avoid paying capital gains on all those taxes. Of course, you're dead. Your estate would have some estate taxes, but that's the only way I know how you can do that. But a lot of people do 1031 exchanges because they have a good gain in a property, which most people do these days. They don't want to pay the capital gains tax on that. Okay, let's look at number 10, please. If a homeowner felt that a tax assessment was unfair. Now, we have county departments in all the counties in Utah that has an assessor's department in it, and they come up with how much your property is worth, and then from that, they have different tax levies and abatements that they apply in order to figure out what your property tax is going to be. But if you felt that their assessment was too high, what would be evidence that their property assessment was too high? I mean, they allow you once a year to go in and challenge your assessments. It wouldn't do you a bit of good in this market because the property values have skyrocketed. They've obviously gone up. But in a declining market, it might be something that you might want to consider doing. All major corporations in our state in a declining market have whole departments that go in every year and challenge. We think we're poorly, unfairly assessed, and so we want to lower that, because if you lower your assessment, you're going to lower your property tax, which goes right to the bottom line. But in this market, if anything, the assessor departments, usually they go through the county and they divide it up into pieces, like 25%, and they kind of go through and reassess everything that way. Now, if there's a sale in an area that's outside of that 25% of the county they're working on, they'll jump over and grab that sale, and reassess that one. But if you haven't sold your house, so you might get a little bit of a weight on that, and you might not. It depends on how hungry they are and how many assessors they have, which is kind of like an appraisal job, only a little different. Similar, but different, okay? Well, one thing is government employed, so. Okay, so what would be evidence? Well, A, similar properties that were assessed at a lower value. Boy, that sounds warm and fuzzy. Hang on to that one. B, neighboring larger properties that were assessed at a similar value, but they're larger properties. That might be evidence that they did overassess you, because they were larger. Your place is smaller, and you're saying, well, it's worth as much as those big places. The previous assessment was lower. Well, it was lower in the past. Well, so what? Property values have gone up, and they've been assigned a tax penalty. Well, that hasn't got anything to do with anything. Correct answer is A. Similar properties were assessed at a lower value, and that's what you'd argue. You'd go in and you'd bring evidence. An appraisal would be a very good thing to take to them at the Board of Adjustments and say, here's why I think I'm overassessed. I had it appraised, and we found some comps, and we think they're overassessed. In addition to being overassessed, you'd be surprised at how many mistakes they've actually made. I've had properties that have actually been miscategorized. They said it was a tri-level, or it wasn't. They said it was a 2-story, and it wasn't. Mistakes can be made, and that could affect the value as well. Okay, let's look at number 11, please. Now we have a Latin term here. It's called ad valorem. Ad valorem, if you stare at it long enough, mysteriously translates, and it says according to value, but you have to stare at it for a long time. But ad valorem taxes are taxes that are based on the value of a property. Well, they're property taxes. A, the replacement value of the property. B, the assessed value of the property. C, the millage value of the property, or the mill levy. D, the broker's estimate of value. Well, obviously this one is B, the assessed value of the property, and which is kind of like that appraisal, that we do when we're selling or buying houses. But it's done by the assessor's department, and they're they try to be fair. It's a tough job in Utah, and it's because we tend to be a little secretive. In Utah, we don't have a dock fee. A dock fee is a small amount of money. It's a small tax that is placed on the face of a deed, so there'll be a little stamp, and it'll, like, well, our most of our immediate neighbors, like Colorado, they have a dock fee, and they stamp it, little dock fee, and they'll write on there, $29.50. Okay, well, if you know what the dock formula is, which everyone knows, it's the same always. Okay, that house sold for $295,000. So that helps the assessor quite a bit, because most deeds don't recite the amount of money that was paid for a property. They certainly don't in Utah, and we don't have a dock fee. So it's very difficult for an appraiser to come up with values on comparables, because they have to get into our MLS and rely on that, or go out and ask people, knock on the door, what did you pay for your property? Yeah, like you're going to tell them. So it's a tough job. But we've never changed that law, and we can't seem to get it changed. So that's just the way it is here. We like it kept private. So most deeds will say $10 and other good and valuable consideration. They won't recite the amount of money paid for a house, which just makes the assessor's job that much more difficult. Let's look at number 12. Which of the following represents the largest tax rate? Now, when we did our math class a few weeks ago, I defined a mill levy for everyone. And of course, the mill levy, what is a mill? A mill is 0.001. It's 1/1000th of a dollar. It's 1/10 of a penny, but it's 0.001. So if B, 0.002 is only 2 mils. Well, that's a lot less than 19 mils. Okay, and $2 per thousand is 19 mils is still more. So the following represents the largest tax, and the correct answer is A, 19 mils. Just remember that a mil is 0.001, and then you can kind of figure everything out from there. You have to know that, or you're going to be stumped on a tax problem, math problem. Okay, let's go to number 13, please. When a municipality wants to determine how much in property taxes the owner of a property owes, the performance, that could be they perform. Do they do an auction, an appraisal, a broker opinion, or an assessment? Well, I kind of gave that one away from our conversation on the last one. Obviously, it's going to be an assessment. It's not going to be an auction. You don't even, how are they going to determine, what someone, well, let's auction that property off, then we know what it's worth and what they should have paid in taxes. No, it's not it's not a real appraisal. It's a whole different form. It's a whole different standard. And it's not they don't go by broker opinions either. They have their own department, and they have assessors there, and they go out and they assess properties. And hopefully they're accurate, but quite often they're not. And actually, tell you the truth, in this market, they're probably below what the market value is. And the taxes are supposed to be ad valorem. They're supposed to be ad valorem according to the value of the property. Okay, number 14. Occasionally you have an area that needs some improvement. A number of years ago in Old Sandy in Salt Lake Valley, we had, the city came in and put in street lights. I'm talking about Old Sandy, not New Sandy, and they put in sidewalks and curb and gutter. That old part of the city never had those put in when those properties were originally built back in the 60s, and some of them even in the 70s. And so they figured, well, they need all this. And so it would be unfair to tax the entire county, or the entire city, even for that matter, just to improve that one or two neighborhoods. And so what they do is they come up with a special assessment, which is answer number D here. But see, a special assessment is a tax that is charged to a specific group of properties for a public project, usually because they will be the beneficiaries of the project, and it's known as a special assessment. Now, the rule is it has to increase the value of your property, at least by the amount of the assessment that they're putting against you. Normally, what they do is they will give you an option on how to pay. They'll say, well, your assessment is $1,800. Maybe you lived on a corner and they put sidewalk all the way around. So you got hit for two sides of sidewalk, where if you'd been in the middle of the block, you'd only have that piece in front of you. But anyway, you had a corner a lot, so you were hit pretty heavy maybe. And you say, well, I could pay the $1,800, or sometimes they let you pay it off over a number of years. When I first moved here, I was a broker in Colorado for a number of years before moving to Utah. And it bothered me because in in Colorado, we were very specific on how to handle assessments. And in our Utah contract, didn't even mention it. So, I had to write it in because if a person elected to pay that assessment over, let's say, a 5-year period, and they'd made 2 payments, and so now they still owe, well over $1,000 on that assessment. When my buyer looked at the property, he saw that it had curb and gutter and a sidewalk, and then, but the contract was mute on that. So what would happen is he would buy the property and then he would be hit with the remaining balance on that assessment, which, I felt was unfair. We looked at the property and said, ooh, I want to pay this much money for that property. My buyer took into consideration the fact that it had that curb and gutter and sidewalk. And so today our contracts address that issue. And it says it'll be paid by the seller, or it'll be paid by the buyer, or it'll be split between them. But with the sellers demanding high prices, I figured they should, they had the option to pay that off several years ago, but they didn't. So, they can pay it off out of the proceeds. So usually I check that, that's what's going to happen. Number 15 is an equitable right of redemption. Now, one of the mottos in real estate, particularly if you're a land salesman, is under all is the land, but really under all is the property tax, because that was legislated into position. And what happens is, well, I have a first mortgage on my home, but in reality, you don't have a first mortgage because, the first lien holder on that property is state government with the property tax. The mortgage is actually subject to the property tax. That's why most lenders require, if you don't put down a pretty heavy duty down payment on a home, they require that an escrows be set up. And so with your monthly principal and interest payments, you also pay into an impound, an escrow account, so that the lender can pay your insurance, which they want to keep that house insured, and your property tax. Because if the property taxes aren't paid, that could be lost at a tax auction. Now, we're not going to get into the ins and outs of tax auctions in Utah. They're a little bit peculiar compared to many other states, but we still consider ourselves an agricultural state, and so they favor the property owner keeping as much of the land as they can. But that aside, there is an equitable right of redemption, and an equitable right of redemption, the answer to this question is B. gives a delinquent taxpayer a grace period prior to the sale to pay the taxes. Now, most states want to get their money up front. Not getting into everything about Utah property taxes, but in our state, we let you slide for 4 years. And in the 5th year, it's sold at the May sale. And so your equitable period of redemption is prior to that sale. So you had 4 years to get in there and make up those back taxes. And if you don't, well, then it's going to be sold at a tax auction. Well, the lenders aren't going to let that happen because that'll push them off the property with their loan. So, and that's one of the reasons they require those impounds. So they pay the taxes for you to make sure that they're paid. Allows a holder of a tax certificate to redeem it for a tax deed. That comes later in most states. So that's a little bit different. In our state, we don't really do a tax certificate. It's an absolute auction at the May after the 4 years of sliding that you've done. C gives a holder of a tax deed the right to acquire the property named in the tax certificate. Or D gives the delinquent taxpayer a grace period after the sale. Well, correct answer for us is to give delinquent taxpayer grace period prior to the tax sale to pay their taxes. Great questions tonight. A lot of them are very pertinent to the type of question you might see. And I liked how Dan did a fantastic job in pulling these together and bringing them to our attention. Does anybody have any other questions they'd like to talk about or ask? Okay, Blake, thanks for coming. You've got my phone number. If you don't, it's 801-556-8000. Whoa, that's 801-556-8000. You're welcome.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.